The sun was just beginning to set, casting a soft orange glow over the quiet streets of Cedarwood. Andre Whitaker sat behind the wheel of his old blue sedan, hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. His heart beat fast, but not from fear. He was nervous, yes, but mostly hopeful. Today was important. Today he had an interview for a new job, a chance to start fresh, to build a better life for himself. Andre looked in the rearview mirror. The street behind him was empty, calm. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful. Then, flashing red and blue lights appeared behind his car. The lights made his chest tighten. Andre pulled over to the side of the road. He switched off the engine and took a deep breath. A police car stopped behind him, its lights still flashing. Officer Greg Harlan stepped out of the car with a confident swagger. He was a tall man with a hard face that rarely smiled. His uniform was crisp, his badge shining on his chest. Greg was known around the neighborhood for being tough, strict, and sometimes unfair. As Greg approached Andre's car, he squinted through the window. "License and registration," he said sharply. Andre nodded and reached into the glove compartment. He pulled out a small folder worn at the edges, holding his important papers, his legal documents, his ID, and the paperwork for the job interview. Greg took the folder roughly. He flipped through the papers without care, then chuckled. "What do we have here?" he said, glancing up with a smirk. "They're my legal documents," Andre said calmly. "I need them for my interview." Greg laughed. "Legal documents? Huh? Looks like just some papers to me. You expect me to believe all this?" He shook his head and tossed the folder onto the ground. Andre's heart sank, but he stayed quiet. Greg bent down, picked up a lighter from his pocket, and flicked it on. The small flame danced in the fading light. "Wait!" Andre said quickly. Please don't burn them." Greg laughed even harder. "Why not? They're worthless." He dropped the flame onto the folder. The edges of the papers caught fire instantly. Smoke curled into the air as the fire grew. Andre felt a sharp pain in his chest, but he said nothing. His eyes stayed on the burning documents. Greg watched the papers burn, a cruel smile on his face. "You think this little act means anything? You're nothing here." Andre's hands clenched the steering wheel as he watched the flames die down, leaving behind black ashes. Greg straightened up and spat on the ground. "You're lucky I'm feeling generous today." Andre didn't respond. Instead, he quietly said, "Have a good night, officer." Greg laughed one last time and turned, back to his car. The flashing lights disappeared as he drove away. Andre sat there for a moment, breathing heavily. The burning of his documents felt like a deep wound, but inside, a small fire of determination was growing. He wiped his hands on his pants and started the car again. The road ahead was uncertain, but Andre knew one thing for sure. He would not give up. The next day, Officer Greg Harlan arrived at the police station, still chuckling about the incident. At the precinct, he boasted loudly about what he did to Andre Whitaker, showing off the small pieces of burnt paper he had kept as a trophy. The other officers laughed and nodded. But one rookie officer, Maria Diaz, watched quietly. She frowned and made a note in her phone. A small detail, but it stayed with her. Back at home, Andre sat at his kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at the empty folder. The papers were gone, but his hope was not. He reached for his phone and made a call. "Yes, this is Andre Whitaker. I'm calling about the legal aid office. I need to replace some documents." His voice was steady, but inside, a fire burned brighter than ever. Andre knew the path ahead would be hard. But if a man like Greg Harlan thought he could stop him by burning some papers, Andre was ready to prove him wrong. The morning light streamed through the windows of the Cedarwood police station. The halls buzzed with the usual noise, officers chatting, phones ringing, and footsteps echoing. Officer Greg Harlan walked through the precinct with a proud grin. He felt powerful, untouchable. Yesterday's event with Andre Whitaker still made him laugh quietly to himself. Burning those papers was the best part, he told anyone who would listen. At the coffee machine, Greg gathered a small group of officers and began to retell the story. His voice was loud and full of pride. So there I was, checking this guy's papers. Guess what? They looked fake. I didn't even need to ask twice. I just lit him up right there on the street. Ha! You should have seen his face. The other officers chuckled and slapped Greg on the back. Some nodded as if this was normal behavior. But not everyone found it funny. Officer Maria Diaz stood a few feet away, watching. She was new to the force, still learning, but she had a strong sense of right and wrong. Greg's story made her uncomfortable. The laughter felt wrong. The disrespect felt wrong. She pulled out her phone and typed a quick note. Andre Whitaker, incident. On Elm Street. Possible civil rights violation. Maria knew she wasn't ready to speak up yet, but she kept the note saved. Something told her this story wasn't over. Meanwhile, Andre Whitaker woke up in his small apartment on the other side of town. The smell of coffee filled the room as he prepared for the day. His mind was restless. He kept thinking about Officer Greg Harlan's harsh laugh, about how his legal papers had been burned like trash. But Andre refused to feel defeated. He sat down at his small wooden table and spread out the few remaining documents he still had, copies he had made the day before. There were IDs, letters of recommendation, and his application for a legal aid program. Today, Andre planned to visit the local legal aid office to replace the burned papers officially. The thought of doing paperwork again was tiring, but he knew it was necessary. Before leaving, Andre took a deep breath and looked in the mirror. He straightened his shirt and whispered to himself, "This isn't the end." At the police station, Greg was still riding high on his victory. His boss, Captain Matthews, called him into his office. The door closed behind Greg with a soft click. Captain Matthews was a large man with a calm voice. He looked serious. "Greg," he began, "I heard about your little incident with Andre Whitaker yesterday." Greg smiled arrogantly. "Yeah, Captain, I handled it. The guy had fake papers. No big deal." Captain Matthews leaned forward. "We have a complaint now. Someone reported your behavior as unprofessional and possibly illegal." Greg's smile faded. "Who reported this?" he asked. The captain shook his head. "That's confidential." "But this is serious, Greg. We're looking into it." Greg left the office feeling a knot in his stomach. For the first time in years, he felt nervous. Andre arrived at the legal aid office. The receptionist smiled warmly when she saw him. "Good morning, Mr. Whitaker. How can we help you today?" Andre explained the situation briefly and handed over copies of his ID. The staff were helpful and understanding. "We'll get your documents replaced as soon as possible," the receptionist said kindly. "And don't worry, these things happen. We'll make sure you're ready for your interview." Andre felt a small relief. There was kindness here, something he hadn't seen in a while. Back at the precinct, Maria Diaz continued to watch Greg closely. She had always wanted to be a good officer. For her, that meant respecting people, following the law, and protecting the community, not abusing power. She felt a quiet strength growing inside her. If no one else would stand up to Greg, maybe she could. During her lunch break, Maria wrote an anonymous letter to the Internal Affairs Department. She described the incident with Andre Whitaker in detail, the burned papers, the laughter, the disrespect. It was a small step, but it felt important. That evening, Greg sat alone in his apartment, staring at the charred remains of the papers he kept as a trophy. The fire had destroyed the original documents, but those ashes seemed to weigh heavy on his mind. He flipped through his phone and saw a message from Captain Matthews. "Internal Affairs is reviewing the complaint. Be ready for a meeting." Greg scowled. This wasn't how things usually went. He was used to getting his way. For the first time, he felt uncertain. Andre returned home that night feeling tired but determined. He knew the road ahead was long. He had to prepare for his job interview, replace his legal papers, and deal with the humiliation Greg had caused. But deep inside, a quiet fire was burning. He sat at his kitchen table, opened his laptop, and began researching legal aid programs, police reform, and community leaders who had fought for justice. Andre wasn't just going to survive this. He was going to fight back, with patience, with strength, and with dignity. The next morning, the precinct was quieter than usual. Officers whispered about the complaint and the possible investigation. Greg walked through the halls, his usual confidence shaken. He caught Maria Diaz's eyes for a moment. She looked at him calmly, but with a new firmness. Greg looked away. At the community center, a group of local residents gathered for a meeting about police conduct. Andre had been invited to speak about his experience and to help plan ways to build trust between officers and the community. When Andre stood up, the room grew silent. He spoke softly, but clearly. "We need respect," he said, "not just from the police, but from everyone. We can't live in fear or anger. We need to work together." The crowd nodded, inspired by his words. Back at the police station, Greg sat alone in the locker room, thinking about what Andre had said. For the first time, he wondered if his way of doing things was right. Outside, the sun was rising, a new day full of challenges and choices. Greg didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. The police station hummed with quiet tension that morning. Officers moved around, exchanging whispers but avoiding direct eye contact. Something important was about to happen. At precisely 9 a.m., the front doors opened wide. Everyone looked up. In walked a man dressed in a dark suit. His steps were calm and steady. He was new to the precinct, but his presence made the air feel different, heavier, yet filled with promise. His name was Andre Whitaker. No one expected this. Greg Harlan stood near the coffee machine, his cup halfway to his mouth. When he saw Andre walk in, his hand froze. The confident smile faded from his face. His eyes widened, disbelief washing over him. Andre didn't look at Greg. His gaze was steady, filled with quiet strength. Captain Matthews followed behind Andre, clearing his throat. "Officers, I want to introduce your new police commissioner," the captain announced. "Commissioner Whitaker will lead this department starting today." The room was silent. The officers stared, some shocked, others curious. Greg's mind raced. The man whose papers he had burned, whose dignity he had mocked, was now his boss. How could this be? Andre's voice broke the silence. "Good morning. I am honored to serve this community and this department. Together, we will work toward justice, fairness, and respect for all." His words were clear, calm, and confident. They echoed in the room. After the brief introduction, Andre headed straight to his new office. It was modest but clean, a symbol of a fresh start. Inside, he placed a small photo on his desk, a picture of his family, a reminder of why he fought. He sat down and opened a folder labeled Department Review. Inside were reports, complaints, and plans for change. Andre had spent years working quietly to prepare for this moment. Now he was ready. Meanwhile, Greg stood outside the office feeling lost. He remembered the day before, burning those papers, laughing at Andre. Now that laughter felt empty, like a distant memory. A young officer, Maria Diaz, approached Greg, cautiously. "Greg, I hope you understand that this is serious," she said softly. "The department is changing. We need to do better." Greg looked at her, surprised by her honesty. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he admitted. Maria nodded. "None of us are, but we have to try." Back in his office, Andre reviewed the complaints against the officers. Some were old, ignored for years. Others were recent, serious. He knew he had to act carefully. Change would not come overnight. His phone buzzed. It was a message from the legal aid office. His new documents were ready. A small smile crossed his face. Later that day, Andre held his first meeting with the department's leaders. "We cannot ignore the problems in this department," he said, "but we can fix them with honesty, respect, and teamwork." Some officers nodded. Others looked skeptical. Greg sat in the back, arms crossed, watching carefully. Andre continued, "We will start with an audit of all complaints and a review of officer conduct. We will train, support, and hold accountable. This is about fairness for everyone." The meeting ended with quiet agreement, but Greg left feeling uneasy. That evening, Greg went home thinking hard. He remembered the moment with Andre, the burning papers, the laughter. Was that who he wanted to be? His phone rang. It was Captain Matthews. "Greg, the investigation is moving forward. You'll have to answer questions soon." Greg sighed deeply. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll be ready." Andre, at home, carefully looked over his new documents. This time they were official, unburned, real. He felt a deep sense of justice. The path was hard, but he had taken the first step. He sat back and thought about the future. He wasn't just a man with papers anymore. He was a leader, a symbol of hope and change. The next day, the precinct felt different. Officers whispered about the new commissioner's plans. Maria Diaz smiled at Andre as he walked through the halls. Greg avoided eye contact but couldn't escape the feeling that something bigger was happening. Andre looked out the window, thinking about the road ahead. There would be challenges, resistance, mistakes, but also progress, because sometimes the strongest power comes not from anger or revenge, but from quiet dignity and the courage to change. The morning sun shone brightly over Cedarwood Police Department. The air inside the precinct felt heavier than usual. Officer Greg Harlan sat at his desk, staring blankly at the papers in front of him. His mind was full of worry. The arrival of Commissioner Andre Whitaker had changed everything. Greg had always thought he was untouchable. But now, he was unsure. The thought of an investigation made him restless. He remembered burning Andre's documents, the careless laugh, the feeling of power. Now, it felt like a distant memory, a mistake he could never take back. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. A message from Internal Affairs. "Meeting scheduled at 10 a.m. Bring all relevant documents." Greg swallowed hard. He stood and walked slowly toward the conference room. His steps echoed in the quiet hallway. At 10 o'clock sharp, Greg entered the room. Two officers from Internal Affairs sat at the table, their faces serious and unreadable. Greg took a seat across from them. "Officer Harlan," said one of the investigators, "we are here to discuss a complaint filed against you. This involves your treatment of a civilian named Andre Whitaker." Greg's heart pounded. He forced himself to stay calm. "I don't know what complaint you mean," he said, trying to sound confident. The investigator placed a file on the table. "We have evidence, including body camera footage, that shows you burning documents belonging to Mr. Whitaker. Can you explain?" Greg's mouth went dry. He remembered the lighter, the smoke, Andre's quiet face. He swallowed. "It was a mistake," he said finally. "I thought the papers were fake. I wasn't thinking." The investigators exchanged a look. "This is a serious violation, Officer Harlan. Burning someone's property, especially legal documents, is unacceptable. We will recommend disciplinary action." Greg nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his actions. Meanwhile, in his office, Commissioner Andre Whitaker was busy reviewing plans for the department's reform. He believed in change but knew it required patience and strength. His phone rang. It was Maria Diaz, the rookie officer who had reported Greg's behavior. "Commissioner Whitaker, I wanted to let you know that the investigation is moving forward. Greg Harlan will be held accountable." Andre smiled softly. "Thank you, Maria. Your courage makes a difference." Later that day, Greg found himself alone in the locker room. The room felt colder than usual. His thoughts raced. He remembered his days on the force, the good times, the easy power, the respect he thought he deserved. But now, everything was different. He looked at his uniform hanging on the hook. The badge he once wore proudly now felt like a heavy weight. Greg knew he would have to face the consequences. Andre visited a local community center that evening. A crowd had gathered to hear him speak about police reform and building trust between the police and the community. He stood at the podium, his voice calm but firm. "We all want a safer community," he said. "But safety is built on respect and justice. We cannot ignore past mistakes, but we can learn from them. Together, we can create a department that serves and protects everyone equally." The audience listened carefully. Some nodded. Others wiped tears from their eyes. Andre's words were more than speech. They were a promise. Back at the station, Greg received a formal letter. He was suspended without pay pending further review. The news spread quickly. Some officers whispered about Greg's fate. Some supported him quietly, others hoped for change. Maria Diaz felt a small victory but knew the work was far from over. Andre returned home that night feeling tired but hopeful. The road ahead was still long, but today had been a step forward. He thought about Greg, not with anger but with sadness. Everyone made mistakes. What mattered now was what came next. The next morning, as the precinct buzzed with news of Greg's suspension, Andre prepared for his first community meeting as commissioner. He knew that real change would come slowly, through hard work and courage. But, for the first time, the future felt different. Because sometimes the hardest battles are won not with anger, but with dignity and strength. The morning light filtered softly through the blinds of the Cedarwood Police Station's conference room. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Officer Greg Harlan sat across from Commissioner Andre Whitaker, his eyes shifting nervously. This was the meeting Greg had feared for days, the moment when his actions would finally be addressed face to face. Andre looked calm, his voice steady but firm. "Greg, I want to talk about what happened that night on Elm Street, about the papers you burned." Greg swallowed hard. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Commissioner, I didn't mean any harm. I thought the papers were fake. I was wrong." Andre nodded slowly. "I understand that mistakes happen. But your actions were more than a mistake. They were a violation of trust and respect. Burning someone's documents, especially legal papers, is unacceptable for a police officer." Greg's shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize it would cause so much trouble." Andre looked directly at Greg. "This isn't just about the papers. It's about the attitude, the way you treated Mr. Whitaker and others like him. We are here to serve all members of the community with fairness and dignity." Greg's eyes dropped to the table. He felt shame, but also something new, a desire to understand and change. After a pause, Andre continued, "I have reviewed the body camera footage. Your laughter, the way you treated Mr. Whitaker, it shows a lack of respect that must not be tolerated." Greg nodded slowly, his voice quieter. "I see that now. I'm willing to face the consequences." Andre leaned forward. "This department is changing. We will provide training and support to help officers grow, but accountability is necessary." Greg looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "I want to do better. I want to be part of that change." Andre offered a small smile. "That's a start." Meanwhile, Officer Maria Diaz watched from outside the room. She had followed the case closely. Hearing about the meeting gave her hope. Maria had reported Greg's behavior because she believed in justice. She had wanted to protect the community and help build a better department. Now, seeing Greg face the truth, she felt that change was possible. Later that day, Greg met with the department's training officers. He signed up for workshops on community relations, ethics, and respect. At first, he was uncomfortable. The sessions challenged everything he thought he knew. But slowly, Greg began to listen. He learned about the history of police and community, relations, the pain caused by unfair treatment, and the importance of empathy. One evening, after a long day of training, Greg sat alone in the locker room. He thought about Andre Whitaker, the calm strength he had shown, the dignity he carried even after everything. Greg realized that true strength wasn't in power or fear, but in respect and kindness. Across town, Andre continued his work. He met with community leaders, listened to residents, and planned new programs to improve police training. He knew change would not be easy. There were many challenges ahead, but Andre believed in patience and persistence. He often thought about Greg, hoping the officer would truly learn from his mistakes. A few weeks later, the department held a community event at the town hall. Residents gathered to meet the police officers and share their concerns. Andre spoke first. "We want to listen. We want to build trust." Greg stood quietly among the officers. He felt nervous but ready. Several community members spoke about their experiences with the police, some good, some painful. When it was Greg's turn, he stepped forward. "I want to say I'm sorry," he said. "I made a mistake. I'm working to be a better officer. I want to earn your trust." The room was silent for a moment. Then a few people nodded. Some smiled slightly. Andre watched with approval. Change was happening, slowly but surely. That night, Greg returned home feeling different. He looked at himself in the mirror. For the first time in years, he saw a man willing to change. He knew the road would be long and hard, but he was ready to walk it. Andre sat at his desk, writing plans for the future. He thought about the power of forgiveness, not to forget the past, but to move forward. The story between him and Greg was far from over, but a new chapter had begun. The Cedarwood Police Department was slowly changing. The atmosphere was still tense, but a new sense of hope was beginning to grow. Commissioner Andre Whitaker worked hard every day, meeting with officers, listening to the community, and planning reforms. The path was difficult, but Andre knew that real change required time and patience. Officer Greg Harlan was trying his best to keep up. The training sessions, the community meetings, the long talks with supervisors, all of it was new to him. At first, he felt defensive and angry, but now he was beginning to understand the real meaning of respect and justice. One morning, Greg arrived at the precinct early. The sun was barely up and the halls were quiet. He carried a small box filled with his personal belongings, things he no longer wanted to keep in the locker room. It was his way of showing commitment to change, letting go of the past. As Greg walked toward the main office, Maria Diaz approached him. "Morning, Greg," she said gently. Greg nodded. "Morning, Maria." She smiled. "I see you're serious about changing. That means a lot." Greg looked down at the box. "I want to do better. For the community, for the department, for myself." Maria nodded in approval. "Good. Keep it up." Meanwhile, Andre prepared for an important meeting with city leaders. The city council was going to discuss funding for new police programs designed to improve training, support officers, and build better relationships with residents. Andre knew this was a crucial moment. The success of these programs could change the future of Cedarwood. In the council room, Andre stood confidently before the leaders. He explained the need for transparency, respect, and fairness. "We need to invest in our officers, but also in the community," Andre said. "Only then can we create a safer, stronger Cedarwood." The council members listened carefully. Some were skeptical, but many were ready to support the change. Back at the precinct, Greg was assigned a new role. He was to work with community outreach teams, attending neighborhood events and talking with residents. At first, Greg felt nervous. He remembered the anger and mistrust people had felt toward the police. Now, he had to face them and build trust. His first event was at a local park. Families gathered for a summer festival, music played softly, and children ran around laughing. Greg walked slowly through the crowd. At one point, a young boy approached him. "Are you a police officer?" the boy asked. Greg smiled. "Yes, The boy looked up with wide eyes. "Can you help me if I'm lost?" Greg knelt down. "Of course, and I'll always do my best to help you and everyone here." The boy smiled and ran back to his family. Greg felt a warmth inside. For the first time, he saw the real side of his job, not as a figure of authority, but as a protector and helper. Days turned into weeks. Greg continued to work with the community, learning more about their lives, their fears, and their hopes. One afternoon, he received a call from a local church. They asked if the police could help organize a safety workshop. Greg volunteered. He prepared carefully, practicing how to speak clearly and kindly. The workshop was a success. People asked questions, shared stories, and even thanked Greg personally. Andre heard about the event and sent a message. "Great job, Greg. Keep building those bridges." Greg smiled and felt proud. However, not everyone welcomed the change. Some officers whispered behind Greg's back. They thought he was weak, too soft, or too quick to apologize. Greg ignored the whispers. He focused on what mattered: the community, his new role, and his own growth. One evening, as Greg was leaving the station, a fellow officer confronted him. "You're changing the wrong way, Harlan," the officer said harshly. "This job isn't about being nice." Greg looked at him, calmly. "Maybe it's about being better." The officer shook his head and walked away. Greg stood quietly, knowing that some battles were not easy, but worth fighting. At the same time, Andre worked on expanding mental health support for officers and community members. He knew that healing was needed on both sides. He organized workshops, counseling services, and support groups. Andre believed that understanding each other's struggles was the key to real peace. One afternoon, Andre visited the neighborhood where Andre Whitaker had grown up. The streets were busy with people, shops, and children playing. Andre walked slowly, greeting neighbors and listening to their stories. An elderly woman stopped him. "You're doing good work, Commissioner. We're starting to believe in change." Andre smiled warmly. "Thank you. We're all in this together." Back at the precinct, Greg finished his shift and looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky with colors of hope. He thought about how far he had come, from burning papers and mocking laughter to building trust and listening. Greg knew the road ahead would still be tough, but now he had a purpose. He was no longer just a police officer. He was part of the change. As night fell over Cedarwood, Andre sat at his desk once more. He looked at a photo of the community center, the families, and the officers working together. He whispered to himself, "We are stronger together." The journey was far from over, but the turning point had come. The dawn broke gently over Cedarwood. The city was waking up, and so was a new hope inside its police department. Commissioner Andre Whitaker stood by the window of his office, looking out at the streets below. He thought about everything that had happened: the pain, the struggle, the fight for justice. But most of all, he thought about the future. Andre had spent many years preparing for this moment. Now he was leading the change he had dreamed of. It was not easy. There were obstacles, doubts, and fears. But he believed in the power of respect and fairness to heal wounds. Inside the police station, Officer Greg Harlan walked down the hallway with a steady step. He felt different. The man who once laughed at Andre, who burned his documents, was now a man trying to make amends. Greg's journey had been hard. He had faced judgment from colleagues, felt the weight of guilt, and worked hard to learn and grow. But he never gave up. Today, was a special day. The department was hosting a community event to celebrate the new changes and to build stronger bonds with the people they served. The large hall was decorated with colorful banners that read, "Together for Justice and Building Trust, Creating Hope." Tables lined the walls with food, information pamphlets, and signs of support. Families, neighbors, and officers gathered. There were smiles, conversations, and even laughter, a sign that healing was happening. Andre stepped up to the microphone, ready to speak. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "This event is more than a celebration. It is a promise that we will work every day to be better, to listen more, and to serve with honor." The crowd clapped softly. Greg stood nearby, watching with a quiet pride. After Andre's speech, Greg took a moment to speak with some community members. A woman approached him, her eyes bright. "Officer Harlan," she said, "thank you for coming to our neighborhood meetings. It means a lot." Greg smiled warmly. "Thank you. I'm learning every day how to be a better officer." Another man joined. "We can see the difference already. Keep it up." Greg felt a deep sense of purpose. The hard work was paying off. Later, Maria Diaz came over to Greg. "You've come a long way," she said. "I'm proud of you." Greg looked at her gratefully. "I couldn't have done it without your honesty and support." They shared a nod of mutual respect. Meanwhile, Andre moved through the crowd, shaking hands and listening to stories. He stopped by a small group of teenagers who were curious about the police. "Do you think things are really changing?" one of them asked. Andre smiled gently. "Yes. Change takes time, but it is happening. We want to earn your trust, and we will work hard every day to do that." The teenagers smiled and nodded, hopeful. As the event continued, a reporter approached Andre for an interview. "Commissioner Whitaker," she asked, "what message do you have for those who still doubt the department's ability to change?" Andre looked into the camera with calm confidence. "My message is simple," he said. "Change is possible when we listen, respect, and hold ourselves accountable. This department is committed to being better, not just in words but in action. We are building a future where everyone feels safe and valued." After the event, the precinct returned to its normal rhythm, but something had shifted. Officers worked with more respect, and the community began to trust again. Greg continued his work with outreach programs, becoming a bridge between the police and the people. Andre's leadership inspired others to believe in justice and fairness. One evening, as the sun set over Cedarwood, Andre and Greg met in the quiet of the precinct office. Andre smiled warmly. "Greg, you've come a long way. I'm proud of your progress." Greg nodded, feeling the weight of those words. "Thank you, Commissioner. I've learned a lot about respect, responsibility, and what it means to serve." Andre looked thoughtful. "Remember, change is a journey, not a destination. Keep walking that path." Greg smiled. "I will." As the days passed, Cedarwood slowly healed. The past mistakes were not forgotten, but they became lessons. The laughter that once mocked was replaced by respect that built bridges. Andre and Greg both knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but now they walked it together, with hope. Because sometimes the greatest strength comes not from power or anger, but from forgiveness, courage, and the willingness to change. And so, in the heart of Cedarwood, a new story began, one of trust, respect, and new beginnings.